overwhelmingly there was, it dealt a lot with my personal stuff, very head on. But then it would always broaden out, and not in a way that was demeaning, but in a very straight to the point fashion, show me that my experiences of heartache and my experiences of difficulty with other humans is not so unique, and that it's something that it's part of our story here, it's part of what we do. And again, there was like this overwhelming lesson that was coming through, that was that although we are all one thing, that part of our default operation here is to deny that we are all one thing. We're all one thing pretending that we're not. All right.
All right. Hello, welcome to Tam Integration's Instrumental Breakthroughs, Psychedelic Origin Stories of Your Favorite Rock and Roll Superheroes. My name is Daniel. I am the Program Director of Tam Integration, and we offer psychedelic integration and preparation coaching virtually all around the world. You're watching us on Deadhead Land. I would like to thank Deadhead Land and Brian for hosting us. And I would definitely love to thank our guest, Colin Frangicetto from Circa Survive. Appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And so I invited you to be here because I am aware that psychedelics have played a large part in your creative process. Mm-hmm. And you've been pretty vocal about it already. And I feel like you understand that it's important that we share these stories. And so, I would like to share those with our viewers.
Absolutely. 1000%. Where shall we begin?
Where shall we? Well, so right now we're streaming on Deadhead Land, and this is a Grateful Dead centric fan site with a lot of, there's a huge community, and your music is not in that genre.
Yes.
So maybe just tell us a little bit about, the history of your projects and things like that, what you're working on, and
sure,
who you are as an artist.
Sure. So I've been a full-time musician for upwards of like almost 18 years now. I started very young and played bands all throughout my middle school, high school days. In high school, I started a hardcore punk rock band called This Day Forward. And it was started out sort of like a joke, but then that was a very crucial step to me starting to tour, play basement shows, community rec center shows, that kind of stuff, touring around in cars and stuff like that. Getting involved in community for the first time, the DIY punk community, and seeing how you didn't necessarily have to be a pop star in order to play music that would bring you all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So when that band wound up doing a lot of things, it wound up being the first experience that I had of signing to record labels and working with booking agents, and slowly that became a full-time project. But we just couldn't make it work. We were just some dumb kids that were really good friends, but at a certain point, all of our credit cards were maxed out. We were opening shows for thousands of people, but selling like 2 CDs. It just wasn't working. So we ended that in around like 2003-ish. And I didn't think I would ever play music again in any professional scope. But about a year later, maybe even a little less, a really good friend of mine, Anthony Green, someone I grew up with, going to shows with, taking drugs with, he was one of my favorite singers, and he was on the verge of doing a project himself, and somehow aborted and decided he wanted to start a band with me instead. And he took this leap of faith. I then took that leap with him, and we began something called Circa Survive, which is a band I've now been in as my main full-time thing for upwards of 17 years. I thought,
That's a good run.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. I thought maybe we'd put out one record, you know, tour for a year, and maybe that would be it. But I was very wrong about that. And every record since then, I've been slowly constructing my own escape hatch just in case the ship goes down, and it just keeps kind of getting stronger and stronger,
Hmm.
despite any of my, you know, kind of I would say societally based fears about it. Um, yeah, so beyond that, I have a solo project called Psychic Babble that's more of a, um, it's a bit more melodic, although Circa's pretty melodic too. I'm really bad at describing what these things are aesthetically.
Hmm.
Psychic Babble is essentially just me playing everything, and then in other cases, it's me remixing other artists.
Hmm.
And so I spend some time on that, and I'm also a pretty active visual artist. I spend a lot of my time making paintings and drawings and exhibiting them and hustling them.
I got to tell you, I really enjoy your skulls
Oh, thank you.
and your portraits of your wife.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, two things I enjoy painting a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah, I picked up. I was always interested in art,
Hmm.
as a kid and especially in school. And I even went to community college for art for a little bit before dropping out, and then eventually going back for film. But yeah, I always kind of wanted to be a visual artist, probably a lot more than I wanted to be a musician. And then
Mm.
becoming a musician, a full-time musician who was touring all over the place and had a lot of downtime, it gave me a way to focus some of that energy and also build another channel of expression. So they've all kind of
Right.
become pretty homogenous at this point.
Right. So Circa Survive's been around 17 years. You've been a working musician for probably well over 20.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Working for sure. We didn't that band
Quote
before
unquote
Circa.
working.
Yeah, that band before Circa, we were just really scraping by, and I think we did it full time for maybe a little under 2 years. But before
Hmm.
that, it was kind of like just working every crappy job possible to save up money to then go on tour. That
Right.
was kind of my existence for many years, for
Right.
sure.
So I appreciate that you're from Philly
Thank you.
and the area because I am, and I sort of grew up there. And there was an interesting, I don't know if you experienced this very much, but there was an interesting alliance between the hippies and the punks
Mm-hmm.
because we both like drugs.
Yes.
And so, there were times being in a basement, on a lot of LSD,
Mm-hmm.
arguing over whether we were going to listen to, Black Flag or Skinny Puppy or the Grateful Dead or Pink
Uh-huh.
Floyd.
Uh-huh.
And those were sort of our, and they were hilarious. They were hilarious struggles to us. Um,
Totally.
but I'm sort of curious, that the show is about, how do these people who are, immensely creative, how are they influenced by psychedelics? What was maybe the turning point or some of the, real milestones as far as journey work went?
Right. Well, I love that distinction, and I don't know if it was a Philly thing, but it definitely seemed very prevalent even when I was when I was just a little kid. When I, started my journey with psychedelics, I was 14, and
Mm-hmm.
even my group of friends at the time, I'd say we were that was our makeup. Influence wise, it was almost split right down the center between, the classic rockers and jazz, and it's just anything freaky and weird from the 60s and 70s, and then you know right down the middle of like, okay, everything punk, everything from DC, everything, Discord, Fugazi, Minor Threat, all that stuff. For whatever reason, it was like that stuff, and then, you know, all the swirling weirdness. Somehow we're both equally influential to us. And something that's kind of funny is that over the years, Circa has almost gotten a reputation to have a jam band quality to what we do, in that we have a lot of our fans will follow our tours around. A lot of
Mm.
our fans have kind of gotten together, to meet and hang out outside of a circus show, and have continued this community where they're friends, and some of them have built families out of meeting, their lovers at our shows, and it has a quality to that, um, that's really, I mean, for me, that was always something that I thought was so special about those communities, about the jam band communities, and um, something that I always would almost fantasize about, having something like that with our band. So it was cool to see that happen almost, kind of naturally. But
Well, here's a question.
go for it.
Is that wanting for community? Do you think that is fueled by psychedelic use? The seeing that, the connectivity and the potential for, the importance of that.
Well, I think it's fueled by human nature, but I think that psychedelics will certainly highlight its importance and show
Mhm.
you that it's part of our story here, and that it's part of the way that we progress as a society, is by honing in on that, I think. And
Mhm.
I think it also is part of our DNA as creatures. Like, we are, you know, you know, we are if you break down just our animalness, like where we come from through evolution, I think that, yeah, we've given this word community, that's what we call it, but
Mhm.
it really is just like, sticking together with other groups of those same creatures, and leaning on each other and creating something better than what was there before. And you see animals do this all the time. And I think that if we could maybe lose some of the attachment to identity and ego, which is like kind of the name of the game here, what we're talking
Mhm.
about today, then you just slip into that community focus a lot a lot easier. It just becomes so much more clear that that
Right.
is what we're supposed to do.
How do you define ego? It's
I
just
think,
softballs.
yeah, yeah, no big deal. Um, I think for me, ego is just the story of the self. It's the
Mhm.
story that we tell ourselves of who we are, our existence in the world, and what we want others to see us as. Um, you know, Obviously, there's a lot more there to go into, but when I talk about, the notion of, ego killing, I think is kind of dicey anyway these days, but just to talk about managing one's ego in a
Mhm.
healthy way, and recognizing that a lot of the ego is basically built upon a default mode,
Mhm.
and sometimes we latch on to what is a pattern of behavior that has just become ingrained. We latch onto that as if it defines who we are, rather than perhaps looking at it as, is that just a trauma response? Is that
Mhm.
a survival fear-based mechanism that I'm sort of conflating as an identity? That's kind of the dance I do with ego, is what am I showing the world on a daily basis about, like what is story and what is genuine? And I think that that's sort of a question that you can
Mhm.
barely answer, really,
Right. I think when I hear you say that, I think about the difference between kind of like what you say, the default is just sort of the constructs of the ego that have just sort of happened
Right.
versus the part that are co-created consciously.
Mm,
To sort of get get an insight into the fact that like, oh, I could probably tweak that a little bit. And that's sort of, why Paul Stamets, says, oh, mushrooms make you a better person.
Right.
Because it's like, moralistic judgments aside, it makes you kind of more the person that you want to be. You get a choice.
Mm, yes. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it, because that that element of choice, I think for a lot of people, especially if you're in the throes of any type of, anxiety or, chronic anything, but chronic anxiety, depression, just negative behavior patterns that you can't seem to break, that quite often we feel like we don't have a choice in the
Mm-hmm.
matter. We feel like we are just along for the ride, and that conditions have presented themselves to us to put us in a position where these behaviors are not a choice. They are, or these, reactions are just something that we have to deal with. And I think that's what meditation, and as you called it earlier before we got on, like, liminal spacing, going
Mm-hmm.
into liminal spaces. And I think those those modes of being show you that you do have a choice to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even though, it's not, which is not to discount the amount of work,
No.
right? Right. It's possible. But, I sort of look at some of those reactions and those trauma responses, and it just seems that they're just plugged into all of the wall jacks. There's just like so much energy running through those things that
Hmm.
it's like almost undeniable. And to sort of start unraveling those cords and unplugging those things from the walls and dismantling that is an enormous amount of work.
Yeah, and I love that metaphor. I've actually said that recently, just the tracing the chords back to the wall.
Mm,
Just this, that's such a rich metaphor, and it seems like that's a lot of what the work is,
hmm
when you're trying to figure out who you are and how you became this thing, why you are a certain way, why you respond certain ways,
hmm
tracing the chord back.
And I think that's one of the things that like the mindfulness sometimes overlooks. Mindfulness almost like reads like, oh, you're just reading code. It's just base code. If you would just delete this line of code, then it would
Sure,
all be good.
sure.
But the kind of enormity of vibratory suffering.
Right, right. And I think that's where bigger teachings come into play for me. I think that I'm not a Buddhist, but I do feel like there's a lot of Buddhist teachings that, especially in times like we are in now,
hmm
just come in really handy, because there aren't these simple, like the chord tracing thing works great for the individual, right?
hmm
When it comes to society at large, it's a lot harder. It's a lot more tangled. And
hmm
and I think at a certain point, there's like this point of diminishing returns when you're really trying to figure out why the world is the way it is, and how we could make it better. And that's sort of where this, I think, the ideology of focusing on yourself and focusing on how to improve yourself and understand yourself is how you make an impact on that whole. It's almost like, untangle your own cord. That that was actually the message, one of the messages that came through on that MDMA experience I was telling you about earlier
Will you
was,
will you go back?
yeah,
Will you remember this thought if you go
sure.
back and give the viewers
Yeah,
the
totally.
scene?
So just before all of this pandemic craziness kicked off, I had an MDMA assisted therapy session. It was originally going to be psilocybin and MDMA, and this was someone I was working with for well over a year. Someone who helped me do some pre-ayahuasca integration type of therapy. Um, you know, this person's motto is preparation is integration. You know, integration is preparation. So we took that approach with ayahuasca. I didn't take ayahuasca with this person, but they helped me in a huge way prepare for that experience. So as my psilocybin MDMA journey was approaching, I was going through a lot of turbulence personally, had some friendships shake out and just a lot of shit hit the fan. And my heart was pretty heavy. I was dealing with a lot of these like interpersonal dramas, micro dramas, melodramas, whatever you want to call them. And ultimately, it was just feeling, yeah, I I was still integrating my, multiple sessions of ayahuasca from months back. Didn't really feel like I wanted to go into the void. I didn't feel like that's what I needed. I felt like I needed some heart-centric medicine and ultimately needed to focus on forgiveness and that type of thing. So we decided to go just MDMA, lose the psilocybin on this one. And I had this inward facing, for the first time, I had an inward facing experience with MDMA, which was essentially silent on a couch, eyes closed, had a journal on my chest. Just every couple minutes would pop up and write something down. But ultimately, it was just like this very intense dialogue with something other than myself, or if it was myself, it was the highest of selves I could have ever spoken to because it used words and phrasings and patterns that I would never use. And it had wisdom that I don't feel like I had, but maybe I did. Who knows? Um, but so I had this session on March 3rd, about 10 days prior to me having to jump on a plane after a canceled tour and travel across the country to get back to my wife and back home. It was a pretty harrowing experience, to be honest, because things were getting really crazy. And I had to, wore a mask for like, I don't know, it was like 10 hours straight, and I didn't break the seal. And that in itself was actually a somewhat traumatizing event to just go through this experience with this mask on that I was afraid of taking off. And we got stuck on the runway for an extra 2 hours. Like it was just
Mm.
very but so yeah. So 10 days prior to that madness, I had this insanely profound experience with MDMA and some type of higher self like entity that was giving me a lot of insight into the human condition and the human species and a lot of this really simple, poignant, like one sentence, just like jaw dropping, almost like commandments, and yeah, it was just overwhelmingly there was, it dealt a lot with my personal stuff, very head on, but then it would always broaden out and not in a way that was demeaning, but in a very straight to the point fashion, show me that my experiences of heartache and my experiences of difficulty with other humans is not so unique, and that it's something that it's part of our story here, it's part of what we do. And and again, there was like this overwhelming lesson that was coming through, that was that although we are all one thing, that part of our default operation here is to deny that we are all one thing. We're all one thing pretending that we're not. And that seems like a lesson that's come through a lot, but for whatever reason in this context, it was so helpful because it almost was in a way it was giving me compassion for myself operating through this experience that really was hurting on a daily basis, where I was just like really kind of hung up on this heartache of losing a friend. And it just cut through all the bullshit and just showed me something. It gave me compassion for myself the way I acted, but it also simultaneously gave me compassion for the other person and how they acted and how we're pretty much running our script here. And while there is a fourth wall break kind of thing that we're discussing here today, idea of kind of stepping outside of that and looking at what you're doing and maybe having a moment to change some of it.
Hmm.
I think when you're in a loop of pain and blame, that it's just so difficult to do that.
Right.
And so that this experience gave me a lot of just relief in that sense.
Right. And you use the term commandments,
Yeah.
which I also experience in these spaces.
Yeah.
I often come out with a list of stuff I need to do,
Mm-hmm.
a list of stuff I need to stop doing, and a
Mm-hmm.
list of people I need to say sorry to.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so
Definitely.
I'm curious, like, if you feel like sharing, what were some of those commandments? What are the things that, you had to change?
Yeah. Well, so circling back to what made me bring this up was one of the things that it said was that trauma trauma is a tangled cord.
Mm,
And it said that your duty is to untangle your own cord. And so there was a lot of these very beautiful, very poignant metaphors, and then just these super simple um, commandments of action like that. And another thing it came to, because it sort of started in this place where it went right for all of my intentions that I had gone in with, things that I wanted to deal with and solve. It sort of was like, okay, let's get to those real quick because we have some other stuff to deal with here. So
right.
it went right to those, and it was just like very quick. Friendship is a story, and it can be momentary and also meaningful. And it was just instant, like these commandments held so much visual information
Hmm.
that a simple sentence like that, now when I say it back, I know it doesn't necessarily hit others the way it hits me, because the way it hit me was like, it's like the image of a torrent or something. You're about to like download this like multiple gigs of information, but you
Hmm.
see it held there with one symbol, right? And I felt like the commandment was almost like that symbol. It was like
Right.
friendship is a story, but within that held so
Right.
much. And it also felt like a secret code.
Right.
Like it was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment in order to understand this principle that I needn't worry about the loss of this friendship because it was extremely meaningful and
Hmm.
no ending could ever take that away from it. Um, and yeah,
Male friend.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. It was very, very powerful to just yeah, it just it would not let me get into the minutia
Right.
of it all. It would not let me get caught up in the, you know, he did, I did, all that kind of stuff. It
Hmm.
was just like, it's okay.
Well, this is kind of interesting. I mean, I hear this kind of stuff a lot, and I've been through it too.
Hmm.
There's something about the male friendship that, like, we don't always let ourselves feel it deeply.
Mm.
Like, maybe it's cultural, but
Hmm.
it's sort of like, if a relative dies, it's like, sure, we it's all very culturally conditioned that we grieve that. And when a romantic relationship ends,
Hmm.
we grieve that, but there's not necessarily space for sort of men to have feelings about their relationships with other men just sort of dissolving.
Yeah, I think for myself, it's interesting because again, it shows you where the gaps between how you perceive yourself and how you truly are.
Mm,
Uh, because I would say that I'm pretty in touch with that part of myself,
right.
and going through, maybe just to bring it back to music a little bit, would be to talk about
Please.
how touring puts a huge strain on your relationships and your
Right.
friendships over the years, and especially for myself, starting in high school and
Mm-hmm.
pretty much never ending until now. I'm like almost 40, and I've been doing this for that long. It's been that big of a role in my life where it's always there. And you just leave people behind in a lot of ways. I mean, you don't. It's not that callous, but it can feel that way.
Right.
And for me, it was a long journey of coming home every time from a tour. Sometimes, it'd be 4 or 5 months of not even being home. For there were certain years where it was just nonstop. And you come home and people are just moving on with their lives. They're just doing things.
Yeah.
They've set up new friend groups. They've established new relationships. Big things are happening, and you're missing them. And
Right.
that, I think, early on gave me a lot of awareness of how much those friendships mean to me,
Right.
and how when they go awry, it's really painful.
Yeah.
And for me, it never really rang as like anything that could be determined by gender, because I guess I have a lot of female friends too,
Got it.
and would go through some similar things like that. But yeah, for this one, it was definitely this felt like I lost a brother. This was someone
Sure.
who I had that close of a relationship with for over 20 years. And for it to just go away the way it did was very painful. And it was one of those things where it truly tied my shit in a knot, where I just like could not get past it for a bit. And this experience with, I know that MDMA is not really an entheogen, it's a empathogen, but I never perceived anything really that psychedelic about MDMA until this experience, where I was like,
Right.
wow, okay, I understand why it's getting put in a similar category.
Right.
But
I
yeah,
loved what you also said about the torrent code.
yeah,
And I feel like people can certainly relate to that. And, I know that I have like gone up to people and be like, don't you see, man, friendship is a story, you know,
right,
and
right.
had like other people say that to me too. And I just
Uh,
think it's fascinating. One of the things I'm very fascinated is the way that the subconscious
mhm.
tries to communicate with us.
Oh yeah.
Because like you said, it is like these enormous amounts of information that has to be encoded for our puny conscious minds to be able to
Hmm.
comprehend.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been just astounded by that ability of the subconscious to understand its conscious side,
Hmm.
in this way. When it needs to send a message, what it has to do,
Hmm.
it's flabbergasting, really. I mean, and that's why, I think my ontological set is pretty firmly in the middle. Like I fall on some days, I'm just pretty staunchly skeptical about a lot of things, and I will always kind of, on on any given day, I could easily just always prefer the more logical scientific explanation to something. Other days, it's like that shit was pure magic. That was absolutely mystical. I have no ability to explain it any other way.
Hmm.
And these experiences allow me to just sit on that precipice of just being in that duality,
Hmm.
like just being right there. Um, and yeah, the subconscious is such a fucking impressive, tricky beast.
You're right. And on the one of the things that I like to do with the subconscious is I was telling you about this. I like to give the people faces and characters. And
Mhm.
so one of the things I'm curious about, and you're a musician, so maybe is there like an archetypal roadie? Is there like a roadie who is like the best roadie in history who's like, because I'm thinking about chord untangling. Like if there
Right.
is there like a roadie throughout history who like you would want to be the guy who untangles your chords?
Uh, I don't know. I think so are you saying sort of like teachers like in that way, or are you talking about actual roadies?
Like
Like,
actual roadies. Like if you
yeah,
were, gonna build, I'm into altar building,
right.
and so sometimes I put weird things on my altar. Like right now, Bill Graham is on my altar
Nice. I put some weird stuff on mine too.
because like just his ability to herd cats, like his ability to like kind of bring a team together of like all of these, and not just like one team. He brought like all these teams together, like this band just
Mm,
sort of. So that's like sort of for me a metaphor for integration.
sure.
Is like bringing all of these kind of disparate parts that like sort of pretty much have the same intention, and then
Right.
kind of getting them to harmonize, for the people
Mm,
is like that's my current, he's up there, he's next to Ganesh, you know?
sure.
And so I'm just wondering, is there a guy who's like, if you had chords, like if there's one guy throughout history you would want to trust your chords with?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I think I often resist placing that type of pressure on individuals, on humans. It's kind of
Right.
like I'm very wary to and this is actually exposes some of my own shit where like
Oh
one
yeah,
of
give it to us.
yeah, like one of my deepest flaws is that I'm just so bad at at you know asking for help. I'm just
Mm,
so bad at um allocating duties and really just there's a bit of a control freak there that just
right.
feels like distrusting that someone else is going to be able to know what to do. And that's the type of thing I've had to work through a lot. And even if it's someone that I totally look up to, it's actually
Hmm.
even stronger because God forbid they fucking let me down, you
Right.
know?
Sure.
Um, so it's kind of like I never want to put anything on anyone because I don't want to live in the moment where they don't come through and then I have to deal with that. And so that's something I've had to work through a lot in you still have to know you have to be okay with the fact that that may happen
Hmm.
and that probably you're just as capable of doing that as anyone else and that yeah
Well, maybe.
maybe and maybe not but ultimately that you can't do everything yourself and that's not the
Hmm.
point. The point of it is that when there's something like that that's challenging you and it's causing you distress and it's like I feel like I'm supposed to do this thing but I just can't. It's like that is you're being shown where the work is. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a commandment for all people, but for me, there's a lesson in that I need to see. And I need
Right.
to realize why is it that I can't seed out these responsibilities to other people and trust them and let them help and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So that's been a journey in music a lot for me actually.
Right. And I'm just curious where forgiveness plays a part into that.
Mm.
Because you were saying, oh, these people are going to mess up. And then, like, well, it's like, so what? It's like people
Yeah,
mess up.
right. Yeah. Forgiveness is yeah, it's just sitting there right on the top of that whole scenario because I think in general you just have to be in a state of forgiveness by default, right? You have to
Hmm.
just be in this place of like everyone's doing their best. And and that actually was another commandment that came through.
Mm,
Everyone's doing their best. And that was one of the first things that came through because and I needed to hear that because my friend who I was dealing with the loss of was going through a lot mentally,
Hmm.
and has always been since as long as I've known him. So realizing that no matter how much I could feel like I was being treated harshly in that scenario, and that I was being not given what I deserved and all these things, it's like ultimately that person was doing their best. They were doing everything up to that moment, what everything that's happened in their lives, every bit of information, every lesson that they've learned, every trauma that they've endured has then informed that moment that occurred between us. Even as I'm perceiving it as harsh, they were perceiving it as them doing their best.
Right.
And so I think that that's where forgiveness comes in to when people let you down. It's kind of
Right.
like almost you should be just understanding the fact that when someone lets you down, that's saying more about your expectations than it is their ability.
Yeah. Can we actually just take a moment and just like appreciate and celebrate the fact that we're doing our best?
Yes, absolutely.
So good job on
Yes.
your best, man.
Good job. Good job, dude. Really good job on your best.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So speaking of which, so there are some people that you seem to be able to work with and trust for a long time. You've been working with this band for quite a while.
Yes.
Um, and I don't want to out any of them without their permission or anything like that, but you know, how does your work, your psychedelic work together influence your music, if you're allowed to say?
Sure. Um, well, everyone in the band has had a different relationship to psychedelics, I think. And maybe that's just sort of a duh, like maybe that's everybody in general, but we haven't done much psychedelic work together. We've had maybe there's a few of us that maybe paired off, early on and even before the band,
Mm-hmm.
where we had a lot of pretty stage setting type of experiences. But throughout the course of our years, there's only been one that was like a literal group experience, where we were all in it together and very intentional. But I think because I'm probably I'm without a doubt the most outspoken about it, and I think for myself, I've used it ex in a very intentional, medicinal way that intertwines a lot with who I am in the band, a lot of my own struggles within the band. Um, so for myself, I think that one of the biggest things that I've taken, and not from any one experience per se, but just I think overall an impact that was made upon me was that it's not my job to steer the ship. It's not my job to try to decide what the band is, where it's going, how people should perceive us, who should like us,
Mm-hmm.
all these types of things. I think those have been probably a combination of learning from learning from certain other artists over the years that I really look up to, but also taking some of these deeper lessons that we're talking about and applying them in a daily basis, especially in close quarters when you're writing a record, recording a record, touring. These are things that really bring out the best and the worst within you.
Right.
And we've seen each other, all of us have seen each other through the worst and the best of ourselves, and the story continues, right? We're still in it. Um, so for me, it's just been, I mean, this whole experience of being in a band for this long, going from a journey where I feel like we really did start as like kids, and
Right.
now we're here, and these guys have kids. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's been a very long, strange trip, not to get really groany about it, but that's been sort of
They love that stuff.
okay, cool. Me too. Um, you know, It's crazy. At this point now, like almost everything we do feels psychedelic, because
Hmm.
especially now doing this Patreon thing has been really interesting because it's forced us into this like archival reflective mode that I think
Hmm.
often we would sort of resist because we're always trying to just stay swimming and be in this place where we're just in the current moment and trying to pluck inspiration out. But going through this whole thing where we're looking back a lot and
Is
maybe
is
expanding on
that
memories.
is that what you're doing on Patreon, pulling like old stuff out and going through, the vault and as it were?
Yeah, that's a part of it. There's one tier that we give access to a digital archive that we update every month. That's just tons of stuff, whether it's personal videos that we took from tours in the studio, writing, whatever, photographs from over the years, demos that never saw the light of day, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
But then like on the actual Patreon platform, we're giving a lot of insight. We'll take, something from there. Like for myself, I was able to pluck out a demo where a rare demo that I actually wrote all the words and lyrics and melodies for a song and had sung it in my voice and presented it to the band. It was like the first example of me doing that. And not many people knew that I had written that song or that just where it had come from. So I got to put my demo out there for the first time, kind of tell the inspiration of the song and the journey of like having the confidence to present that to the band, kind of the temperature of the band at the time, what we are going through, and why this song kind of meant what it meant. And it just was really pretty amazing, to be honest, to think about the moment of inception of the song all the way to the moment of sharing that in a reflective way on Patreon. It had a
Hmm.
very psychedelic feeling where not only did I think in a moment when I was writing this song, like, I hope that the people down in that alley, I was like looking out on this like alleyway about, I was from a window. I was in this apartment above this bar. I was just looking down in this alleyway. It was like 2 in the morning, and I was like a little sauce myself, and just like smoking a cigarette and like looking down, and all these drunk people coming out of the bar and like whatever. And I was just thinking, man, I hope that like in a bunch of years that like some of the people in this alley are singing this song one day. Like that would be
Mm.
really cool. And just taking that and even like extrapolating a little bit further out and realizing that I have like a bunch of people now paying a monthly fee that are actually interested in that moment and me explaining that to them and just how weird that is in general. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I
I
got
don't
here
know
somehow.
I don't know what question I asked anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I was inviting you. I don't know if I was, but
Oh, to talk
uh
about band psychedelic experiences.
right. But so
Yeah.
you are doing a Patreon, I do want to give you a chance to like plug that, but that was a nice one. That was a pretty nice plug for Patreon.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I try not to do the hard sell thing on it because it just
Hmm.
feels like this thing that's growing on its own and it is what it is. And I have my own as well where I do a lot of art stuff and stuff for my
Hmm.
podcast and all that. But it's like I feel like being someone who I'm a patron of a lot of other people, like I'm on
Right.
Patreon myself, and I just think it takes a level of obsession that just kind of takes you over the edge, and you want to go support this artist in some other way, and kind of just look around in the boxes that they have for you. They're like,
Hmm.
there's a bunch of stuff that I don't know if everyone's interested in, but you probably would be. And there's something about that that's really intriguing and cool for me. So I love it. Um,
Well,
but
it
yeah,
sounds to me like you're doing it right
yeah.
because like I've set one up for this. I don't know what to do with
Well,
it.
if you ever want to talk about it, I'll
Yeah,
give you some ideas. I mean,
for sure.
uh, I think it really does take, for me, a huge informal experience was just becoming a patron of other people and just seeing how the whole thing feels to be on the other side of.
Hmm.
And then it gave me this again, I think that this is sort of a psychedelic lesson applied, is to just sort of try to, put yourself in someone else's position
Right.
and see it through their eyes and try to get this understanding of a situation from all angles. And, you know,
Sure.
that's what that's all been for me. But
Well, it brings us back to empathy.
yeah, totally.
Yeah, and pathogenic is no small thing.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1000%.
Do you want to maybe close us out with? I still would love like a story from young
Mm,
Colin,
okay.
like an initiatory experience of this
Yeah,
young man who's breaking through.
totally. Um, I was thinking about like what stories to tell on here because there's so many and they're from all these different time periods in my life. But since you said young, I'll go for that. Um, so my very first LSD experience was at 14, and I took it with four friends at a friend's house, and we got it from an older brother. God bless older brothers and older sisters.
Oh, it
Uh,
remind me to come back to the older younger relationship
okay,
later.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, so I had no idea what I was getting into other than like, I had seen the movie The Doors. That's about it.
Mm.
And smoked weed for about a year at that point, but that's about it. And this was just, I mean, it came on pretty fast, and when I think back to it, there was just so many funny but really interesting things that occurred almost right away. Where so the four of us, we instantly split off into two groups, which I think is funny. And our two groups almost took on a tribal like camp like um identity, where myself and my friend who was in my camp, we were like, this is fucking magic. What
Mm.
the hell is happening right now? We were totally sharing visions, and where we were seeing symbols and lights coming through the wall, shapes of lights, almost like, sacred writing type of shit. And we were writing into the air with trails. I mean, I wish so badly I could go back in time and have some master of reality be like, yes, you took this many micrograms, because I would love to know what the dosage was.
People really want to know what the dosage is these days. That was
I'm just
never a concern when I was a kid.
Hell no, that was not a concern for most of my usage up until maybe a few years back, when I was like, oh, maybe I should probably get a little more into that.
People started
uh,
making charts for public consumption.
yeah. But goddamn, when I think about some of the stuff that happened in this first experience, I'm like, man, it must have been high, because uh, I've taken 100 mics, and it's been nowhere near this. So,
Mhm.
yeah, this was just next level, some of the stuff that was going on. But anyway, so we were in the magic camp, and the other guys were, this is just drugs, man. It's just
Mm.
drugs. And so that instantly occurred. This sort of skeptical versus believer mindset was like right at the forefront of this first experience, which I think is interesting. And then the other thing is that um, myself and the other guy in my group, in my camp, we were playing music together. So he was someone who was pretty important to me growing up, in finding my own creativity, and I actually wound up having my very first recording studio experience with him probably about a year after that. Um, but so so we were listening to music the whole time. I remember very distinctly listening to "Hit to Death," "Hit to Death in the Future Head" by Flaming Lips,
Mhm.
and just how strange and amazing it sounded while tripping. And it made me want to make music that would sound good while people were tripping. And I felt like there was almost this whole other layer of communication happening with the lyrics and the vocals and just everything about it. And it totally changed the way I thought about writing music,
Mm-hmm.
from like this very one-dimensional thing to all of a sudden it's like multiple dimensions, very multi-dimensional. And but so I experienced a very distinct initiation here, like
Mm.
almost literal, where within the experience it was probably maybe an hour or so after I had the obligatory stare at yourself in the mirror moment. um, I was beckoned to come outside to the backyard, and there was this pathway between my friend's um, fence where that ended and the fence behind that fence, so that you could
Right.
kind of go in this way that would walk between the fences. And it became like this portal, and it was like this was the initiatory walk that we all had to take, and we had to take it alone. So
Mm.
each one of us would go through this dark spot in the fence, kind of disappear, and you didn't really know what was back there. You're just like, okay, you have to go through, and then you got to go find yourself. Like that was what they would say. And I remember going into that blackness, and as soon as I got into there, it was kind of like, oh, I just thought it was all going to be fun. I just thought like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to go walk around here and come back, and like maybe I'll try to trick them or scare the guys or something. My head was totally in that space. I was not prepared for what was about to happen, where I just went through this blackness, and then all of a sudden I couldn't see anything, and I was just in this void. But I knew that I had to keep moving forward. I had to keep walking, and I could hear them kind of in the distance, but they started fading, and all of a sudden it was just me, this blackness, and I would start to feel like these things kind of going by my face, which I think were probably branches or something like that. But I started getting this feeling of panic, and like I got to get out of here. I don't know what I'm doing. Like just that classic, you're in the throes of something, and you want to quit. You want to go home. I started feeling like I want my mom. Like that's kind of what I was thinking. And it's interesting that I started thinking I want my mom, because it started feeling like a birth experience where I was,
Right. That's what I'm thinking. Dark
yeah,
void. Yeah.
yes. And then all of a sudden I see this pinhole of just a light, like way off in the distance. And I just start kind of trying to get there. And at this point, I feel like I was probably like making noise. I was probably like, oh, like, ah, like,
Mm-hmm.
really like struggling with the moment. But I knew I had to get through it, and I just kept pushing. And all of a sudden, I just like plopped out the other side of the neighborhood, like onto the street. All of a sudden there's a street light, and I like made it. And I was
Mm.
like, oh, and like all of a sudden, like I just hear like this celebratory, like, yeah, like all my friends like ran out, and they like grabbed me, and they're all just like shaking me. And I was just crying. They're just like, oh, like, but I was so happy, and I felt like I did feel like I found myself in that moment in a weird way.
Mm-hmm.
It really stuck with me, and nothing was ever the same after that, actually. Going back to school and going through, you know, situations with like bullies and just sort of this weird alienation that just occurs, I think, when you're going through those strange years of like, 15 to 18. It's just a very strange time. Um, but I all of a sudden looked at everyone differently. I all of a sudden, the things that people would say, they didn't they didn't cut as deep anymore.
Right.
Everything was sort of like, oh, I understand why you're afraid. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you just haven't walked through that void, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, there was this beautiful thing that happened later when I wound up going to back to my parents' house. I was coming down, and I was still very much so tripping. Everything was weird, but I was sort of out of the, you know, extremely yeah, that place that you get to where you could never try to pretend like you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was slightly out of that, but it was still very visionary. And I was sitting on a couch with my dad, and we were talking, and I was first off just astounded that he wasn't just telling me that I was on drugs because I felt like it had to be obvious, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe it was. Maybe he was just playing it cool. But we were having like this pretty just fun, lighthearted conversation, and I started having this super this is a vision that would actually occur many times for me on LSD, and I don't know if this is just a normal thing for people, but when you're talking to people and they just start changing like their size, they start feeling like they're going very small, and then all of a sudden they're getting bigger, and but so with my dad, there was this extra element to it where when we were talking, all of a sudden he started to shrink, and as he was shrinking, he was becoming a baby.
Mm.
And as he was shrinking, I was growing and aging and becoming this old man. And like all of a sudden we started just toggling back and forth where he was the baby and then I was the baby and then he was the baby and then I was the baby. And I realized like in that moment, like, holy shit, like I'm being taught something right now. You know, I was seeing how, oh, so this is the cycle of life. You know, I came into this world, this baby, and then as I grow, my father is gonna almost, you know, regress at some point, and then it's gonna be my turn to take care of him. And it was just this cycle that was being shown to me in this very Freudian visual like tableau that just like
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the moment where psychedelics really had me. It was like, oh, this is so much more than drugs. Like, this is life. This is showing me, this is giving me a deeper insight into what this journey is all about here. And it was just the things like that. But that experience had so many crucial elements within that first experience. There was just so many things that then would
Mm-hmm.
extend out over time and play themselves out in many different ways. And I still have, you know, things to learn about them, of course. But that experience was very formative for me.
One of the things that really stands out for me, I love it. I think it's a great story, is to move from this mindset of, oh, I can't wait to jump out and scare my friends,
Right.
to being like, oh my God, we're all in it together. Oh, look at this celebration of success.
Totally.
Is like a really interesting kind of immediate maturation
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
absolutely. Because that, you know, when you think about it, that inclination of when things start to get serious and you have that young mindset of like, how do I distract from this? And
Mm-hmm.
when you're around peers, there's almost always this opportunity to do that, to deflect
Right.
and to go into sort of this immature response. And I think that that inclination I was feeling was that,
Right.
but it was sort of like too late. You walked through the void. Got to go
Mm-hmm.
now. And coming out the other side, the celebration was like, oh, this is so much better than that kind of like little childlike you know, notion to try to scare them or try to do whatever. It was like, oh no,
Right.
we're doing some whole nother shit now. Like,
And it's
so
just also interesting how it makes us strong. You
hmm
know, you're and understanding like the just the survival of, you know, going through the void.
yeah.
You know, it's like, oh man, I made it. If I can do this,
Yep.
I can do anything.
Oh, totally. I mean, it dwarfed so many previous experiences of like melodrama and pain, which is deeply ironic that, you know, find myself at, you know, 38, then having a similar kind of surface level relationship based pain returning and then seeing how it's this cycle that we go through and it's just part of what we are here. But but yeah, those lessons of it's more than that, and you have to zoom out and you have to really cultivate this, it's like it's weird because I don't want to call it a thickened skin because I think that that implies like desensitizing, but like it's more just about empathy, like you said earlier. It's about understanding that all things that cause you pain are probably born out of pain themselves, and that like the people out there who would maybe hurt you are hurting. And these things are sort of cliche, but they're
Mostly,
cliche
I
for a
mean,
reason.
there are a fair amount of sociopaths out there.
Sure. Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think that's
Absolutely.
important. There was a really interesting article I read that, on one hand, there's people who cause pain out of pain and maladaptivity,
Sure.
and dealing with them in a particular way and with that sort of compassion understanding is useful, but
Hmm.
it doesn't work if someone's a straight up psycho.
No, it doesn't.
And so kind of developing the skills to be like, oh, that person is just really low conscience,
Right.
like high
Sure.
aggression, low conscience, is sort of important in the it's like a kind of a good life skill.
It is, and I think it's good that you called it a skill because I do think it's hard, especially in this day and age. It feels like a lot of us want to call anyone that doesn't agree with us a psycho,
Right.
right? And I think that that's where it does become a skill that takes honing, and it takes you know, really leaning into awareness and empathy
Right.
and trying to see, okay, is this person just missing something when it comes to an ability to feel for others, to care
Mhm.
for others, or are they just coming from a different place and perhaps they were hurt in other ways that I can't understand right now. Um,
Right.
and sometimes it could be both, I suppose, but
Right.
yeah, I don't
Because
know.
I am aware that there are people that I do agree with on a lot of issues
Hmm.
that lack empathy.
True. True.
And of course there are people, everybody has this romantic belief. If they just gave psychedelics to the person they didn't agree with, all of a sudden that person would then agree with them.
No.
You know,
Yeah, I think that's actually a hugely underspoken about thing, the phenomenon of ego strengthening that can
hmm
occur with psychedelics. It's talked about a little bit more these days, but it really, this whole like panacea for the ego thing that was pushed for a while, I think I've seen it to be quite untrue for a lot of people, and
right.
how my one friend and I, we talked about it, and I just likened it to beards. I said, yeah, you can shave the beard off, but then it grows back in thicker.
Right. Yeah. So there are, I like the term psychedelic resistant strains of ego.
Sure.
I think
Yeah,
is
that's
really
funny.
useful. Especially, the Buddhists map realms of life, death, and rebirth. And
Hmm.
they have these sort of God realms and jealous God realms where sort of people are sort of spiritually awake, but with still a very entrenched, aren't I great because of it?
Right.
Aren't I so
Yeah.
great because I realize that we're all one?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Totally. I mean, it's such a trap,
Hmm.
and it's a very potent one when it comes to this topic, I think. And
Yeah.
I think anyone who's spent time in the psychedelic community or even just the mindfulness community or any of that stuff, there is sort of this conflation when it comes to that. When it comes to doing this kind of work, I think often there are people that can succumb to the idea that perhaps it makes them above other people, or
Right.
that, there's just this sense of self-righteousness that can occur.
Right.
Um, and, it's there regardless, but
So
uh,
regardless, but how do we get to the place where we're just like celebrating when people are getting through the bushes?
right, exactly.
It's like that's kind of really where I want to be
Yes.
most of the time. Is just keep going, celebrating the bush walk.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's a great way to put it, for sure,
Hmm.
man. I
Because
like
yeah,
that.
at the sun rises and the ego comes back in one form or another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. It's like that beard.
It's
Comes
like
in
that
thicker.
beard. Yeah, I mean, the ego, killing your ego would be fine if it like worked.
Yeah, it's all about integration,
Mhm,
like that's the magical word. It's, you can't get rid of any of these parts of yourself, in my opinion. And I
mhm,
mean, that's why for me, IFS therapy became super crucial for me because I was constantly trying to, surgically remove parts of my personality or parts of my, you know,
mhm.
conscious mind that I didn't think, I didn't like, and I think
Right.
that's one of the main principles of IFS is that the second you say I don't like something, like I don't like this part of me,
Mhm. Right. Who's
you're,
that guy?
yeah, you're not in what they call self if you can say I don't like that because self would never
Mhm.
say that.
Right.
Uh,
Only the ego wants to kill the ego.
right, exactly. It wants to devour parts of itself so that the part
Mhm.
that thinks it's in control can get more. It's all
And to
about
get
who's got the mic.
right, and to get real non-dual about it, the ego is illusion anyway. Right.
Hmm.
You said at the beginning, it's a story,
Yep.
and so it's like, how do you kill an imaginary thing?
Hmm.
And isn't the experience of the imaginary thing coming and going also imaginary?
Yes. One.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, I wish we had another like hour for to go into IFS.
Yeah. Well, we can do it again. Whatever, man. I'm,
Right
al- I'm
on.
always down to go longer too. I don't know how long you do these things, but yeah.
Maybe a little bit, I would love for you to maybe just sort of tell people, the part of the show where you tell people where to find you.
Sure. On all social media, I'm at Colin Circa. That's one L, COLINCIRCA. I have a podcast called The Cosmic Nod.
Hmm.
I have a lot of cool people on there. I'll probably have you on there if you'll have some time soon. Uh, I'm around. You can find me. You can always
Right,
email me, colincirca@gmail. Google will do lots of work for you if you put my name in there.
right. It's cool.
Yeah.
Very good, very good. Thank you so much for coming.
Hey, my pleasure. It's great.
Any sort of, do you have like a last commandment for everybody?
Ooh, you know, I think hold on, let me get my book here. I
Okay.
have my book from the experience. I'll
Yeah,
drop
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
drop
Get the
commandment for
book.
you.
Does it have a cool cover?
It's just this thing. I don't know.
Yeah, that's cool.
It is pretty cool. I don't know. I like plain stuff usually, but so much of what we talked about is in here already. It's so weird. Uh, so what it actually was is trauma is a knot.
Hmm.
Must learn to untangle your own cord. And then, speaking of forgiveness, it says, forgiveness is just alignment with higher truth. Uh,
Love it.
yeah, so let me just go to the back because I think the back is it was interesting as I got to the end of the book. Like I ran out of space. The dialogue started shifting into like an ending for a
Hmm.
page. So it's finality is another illusion. Endings are just the first phase of a new beginning. An entrance is an exit from the place you were before.
Beautiful.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been Instrumental Breakthroughs with our guest, Colin Frangicetto. I'm your host, Daniel Shankin. You can find us on tamintegration.com, also on all of the social media channels. Hit up Colin's Patreon, my Patreon, and maybe even Dead Headlands Patreon.
Yeah.
Um, and just, I guess, align yourself with higher truth, forgive each other, love each other.
Mm.
And we would also just, if you're within the sound of our voice, we would also like to congratulate you on doing your best.
Congratulations, everybody.
Congratulations.
I love you.
I love you.